Thanks so much for doing this, Doctor.
Yeah, no problem.
There's a perception, at least at the moment, that conspiracy theories are everywhere, that we're in a golden age of conspiracy theories. Is there evidence for that? And I mean, why does it feel so dire right now?
I think there is some evidence that we are closer to a peak now. And then beyond that, just in terms of frequency, what I think is curious and certainly seems to be true just in terms of my own life experience is that sure, on the one hand, there have been people for years that believe that there was a conspiracy related to JFK's assassination. People write books about them. I've had friends who read books about them. But did that really affect their daily lives, or was that affecting public policy, or was that really having a substantial impact on the future? Well, no. And even something like flat Earth beliefs, okay, maybe I might spend time doing that and I'm going to the convention, but is that really impacting what's happening in the world today? I would again argue no. So, what I'm more interested in, and what sort of inadvertently happened after I started getting interested in conspiracy theories and started writing about them from an academic perspective, is that I think there's reasonable evidence that the kinds of conspiracy theories that people believe are more consequential. They matter. It's not just about JFK being assassinated 40, 50, however many years ago that was. Now it's about climate change being a hoax,
Hmm.
or vaccines, don't work. They cause more disease than they cure. I mean, those I think are, and especially for me as a physician, those are really more concerning beliefs that can have a clear negative impact on both individuals, but also the fate of society. So I sometimes say that, okay, maybe we're not living in a golden age of conspiracy theories in terms of them being more prolific, but perhaps you could make an argument that we're living in a dark age of conspiracy theories because they're more imminently consequential and have more of a potentially negative impact.
How do our brains work that we're wired for falling into this sort of stuff?
I think it's easy for us to appreciate just how common it is for everyone to have false beliefs. I mean, we sort of engage in self-deception that makes us feel better about ourselves. Sometimes we just have the facts wrong. There's many examples where I think it would be sort of the extreme of arrogance if we were to say, well, I don't have any false beliefs. Everything I believe is right? So we can understand pretty easily that this is common. Now, why is it common, and what are the sort of psychological mechanisms, the normal psychological mechanisms to account for that? Well, there's a big, long laundry list of them. We talk about cognitive biases. We talk about heuristics. We talk about logical fallacies, which are just part of the machinery of how we believe. And going beyond those generalities, there are then specific examples of phenomenon like the Dunning-Kruger effect or the illusory truth effect. So there's a long laundry list of these different psychological mechanisms. What I like to say to kind of simplify things and provide a kind of more universal, sometimes I call it a more humanizing perspective that gets us away from thinking along pathological terms, is really just three core components. The first is mistrust. When we mistrust traditional sources of institutions of knowledge or authority, that then opens us up to the second component, which is belief in misinformation, right? If we don't believe the sort of conventional narrative, we start looking out there and we find a million other counter narratives. And the third component, which also happens to start with the letter M, is motivational reasoning. This is a process by which we, once we actually engage with information, we tend to find fault with information that doesn't support what we believe. Right. So if I'm, an anti-vaxxer and I hear that the CDC has once again said, that a study has shown that vaccines don't cause autism, then I'll say, well, wait a minute, who paid for this study? Was this person, getting money from pharma? And what about the methodology? Right. Now, to be fair, that's often what we also say about the, so-called evidence that anti-vaxxers come up with. and we'll say, well, wait a minute, that's a poorly designed study. So I think that's a nice illustration of how we all engage in that sort of motivated reasoning to some extent. But I think thinking about it in those terms, mistrust, misinformation, and motivated reasoning, it helps us to understand how common, how universal that vulnerability can be to false belief. Because I think too often we think, oh, well, this person's uneducated, or that's anti-intellectualism, or they're crazy, or this is mass delusion. I don't think that's the best way to understand what we're dealing with.
What's your definition of a conspiracy theory, and what's your definition of delusional thinking or a delusion, and how do they differ?
Well, as a psychiatrist, there's sort of an official definition of a delusion. And I actually can't quote it for you spontaneously. It's pretty wordy, but the simple definition is a fixed false belief. So it's a belief that pretty clearly is not true, that's held with unassailable conviction. So even though one is presented counter evidence, the person remains entrenched. And now I'll tack on to that definition what I said before, which is that most of the time when we're talking about these types of beliefs, we're talking about self-referential beliefs. We're talking about beliefs about, the individual. So that's what I would put into the domain of a delusion. Now, to be fair, and one of the things that got me interested in that gray area is that even for that definition, there's some gray area there as well, right? Like if I have a belief about the nature of God, or if I have the belief about, for that matter, even being the second coming of Christ, we might have disagreements about whether or not that would be even possible. So falsity, the judging about whether or not a belief is true or false, even when things are pretty clearly in the delusional realm, that can be a challenge sometimes, because many of the beliefs we have about existence or the universe are not falsifiable. So I've always sort of had fun with that, again, gray area. Now, if we shift to conspiracy theories, there is not, unlike in psychiatry, there's not any one official definition. So if you look at conspiracy theory researchers, whether they're coming from sociology or political science or psychology, there's probably 100 different definitions out there. The way I like to define conspiracy theories is that I say that they typically reject authoritative accounts of events or circumstances in favor of this narrative that there are clandestine and malevolent forces out there that are orchestrating things with some sort of ill intent. So you can see that my definition is this kind of two-part definition that goes back to what I was saying about mistrust and misinformation. There's a component of I reject this belief, number one, right, that JFK died because of a lone gunman. I reject that, and then I embrace this counter-narrative. Or I reject the belief that the earth is round, but I embrace this other idea that not only is the earth flat, but if you think about it, if the earth was flat, there would have to be this vast conspiracy, this vast cooperation between NASA and space programs across the planet in different countries, all conspiring to pull the wool over our eyes about this. So that's the rejection of the sort of prevailing theory, and then the embrace of the counter narrative that has this conspiratorial bent of ill intent and secret things going on behind the scenes.
Are all conspiracy theories delusions?
No, I mean, to be clear, there can be overlap, right? Some conspiracies could be delusions, and there are certainly examples of people who have conspiracy theory beliefs, which I generally would consider not to be delusional, that have a delusional component. I might have a conspiracy theory that the government is engaging in a mass surveillance system of all citizens.
Yeah.
Which on certain level, there's some elements of truth to that, right? We live in the society where cameras are everywhere and, they can monitor us on cell phones, Facebook and that sort of thing. But there's a difference between that level of kind of vague belief about what's happening in the world and saying, well, no, I think it's definitely the CIA has tapped my phone and they're monitoring me. So that's where a conspiratorial belief can sort of bleed into delusional thinking. But when we talk about conventional conspiracy theory beliefs, whether it's about JFK or the moon landing being faked, or the Earth is flat, or QAnon, I think by and large we're not talking about mental illness. We're not talking about delusions. And again, because those are beliefs that we've just picked up. We've read about them somewhere. I often say that I don't really like the term conspiracy theorist because it gives the impression that someone's trying to connect the dots and they've got the bulletin board with the thumbtacks, and that's not really what most people who endorse conspiracy theories are doing. Mostly, they're just getting on their keyboards and going, "Ooh, I've now found 200 reasons on YouTube why the Earth is in fact flat," right? So it's not really theorizing so much as just gathering and assimilating misinformation that's out there in the world.
But if you're believing things about yourself or you are part of that, is one more a sign than the other of potentially a clinical condition?
Yes, I think that the self-referentiality is more typical of a clinical delusion, the kind of false belief I would encounter in treating patients with psychotic disorders. And one of the reasons that I put emphasis on that is it really, I think, is one of the best predictors of whether or not a belief is shared or not. But there are certain beliefs where we find hundreds or thousands of people who share our belief about a religious faith, for example. I think where shareability, the ability to share in the same belief, where that starts to fall apart is when we start talking about self-referentiality. So again, going back to the idea of how many people on the planet believe there will be a Messiah, how many people believe there will be a second coming of Christ. Well, I mean, that's a lot of people. But how many would believe it if I came on and I said, "Well, hey guys, I'm the new Messiah," right? Then it's like all of those people, it falls away. So I think that's why self-referentiality can be helpful.
Your book has just come out as we speak to you. False: How Mistrust, Disinformation, and Motivated Reasoning Make Us Believe Things That Aren't True. One thing you talk about in your book is basically helping people who get stuck in this way of thinking, and specifically, I think QAnon. But you mentioned how important it is to try and maintain a connection with somebody without judging them, or even trying to correct them, really, or fight them on their beliefs. Can you talk us through, especially for people listening to this who might have a loved one who's fallen into this sort of thinking, what should they do?
Yeah. Well, I think my experience as a clinician through the years has taught me that that's where you start, right? You start from a non-judgmental, genuine desire to understand where the person's coming from. People ask me all the time, how should I approach a conversation with my loved one about QAnon or whatever conspiracy theory belief that they have? And the first question I pose to the person asking that question is I'll say, well, what's your goal? What's your agenda? And oftentimes the agenda is, how can I talk them out of this crazy belief? And if you start from that perspective, then you're done, because we're all, I think, kind of primed to defend our beliefs, and particularly when those beliefs become integrated or fused with our identities. Because when that happens, and this is true oftentimes of religious beliefs or ideological beliefs, or in some cases, like with QAnon, conspiracy theory beliefs, if I'm going to concede, oh my gosh, I'm wrong, what does that mean? It means that not only is my belief wrong, but because it's become fused with my identity, I'm sort of fundamentally wrong. Or what I've been doing for the past 5 years as I've been immersed in this subculture, that's been a waste of time. And that's, people aren't likely to just give that up right away. So in psychotherapy, when you are working with people who have major depression and they might have self-deprecating ruminations, or if you're working with a psychotic individual that has a delusion, you can't start off the bat with, let's talk about how you're wrong, right? You have to start with the understanding part and kind of mapping out the belief and why do you believe that? And that then opens up an opportunity then to then have a dialogue about it and potentially to challenge the belief. But that's going to take some time.
I mean, how can you maintain your composure? How can you keep patient and not just be like, you idiots, why do you believe this stuff? Stop talking about this stuff.
That part for me is easy because I think because I'm just genuinely fascinated about why people do have those beliefs. So I actually, to a certain extent, like hearing those stories. I think what's different, though, as a clinician, I sort of tell this familiar joke in the book. This joke or riddle goes, how many psychiatrists does it take to change a light bulb? And the answer, the punchline is it just takes one, but the light bulb has to really want to change. And so if I'm working with someone in a clinical setting, there is often or usually there's the patient is there to work with me because they want a change of some kind. It doesn't necessarily have to be I want my belief to change, but it could be I'm stuck, I'm miserable, I'm no longer socially connected. And then we get into the fact that maybe that belief system may lie at the root of it. But that person is there wanting to engage with me. If they don't want to engage with me, then they leave and I don't see them again. So that's one thing that's different between psychotherapy or working in a clinical setting and interviewing somebody, about conspiracy theory beliefs. They're not necessarily open to say, I want to make a change of some kind.
I've kind of learned over the years that when I kind of get into a bit of a pit of depression, it's all self-referential, which is a term I've learned today. But it's all self-referential. It's a lot of hate and guilt, and it's all directed at me. And I can see then when I'm better, that they're very irrational thoughts, irrational beliefs. But in the moment, of course, they feel very real. And at some point over the past few years, I just started to realize that the more people I spoke to who were stuck in QAnon or whatever else, that they had these irrational beliefs. And sometimes, you could talk to them about anything else and they're all good. But bring up the one specific thing and you sort of see that switch go off. And they're in the irrational space then. And there's no convincing them of otherwise. And I sort of see myself in that. I just want your kind of honest assessment on and look, I mean, the result is that I get to empathy there, which is good. But about the actual, talk to me of the science of the actual processing and maybe how it's different in a way that I didn't realize from a medical perspective or just how our brains work.
Well, two thoughts come to mind. One is that it's certainly possible for any of us, whether we have mental illness or not, to get kind of stuck in these sort of repetitive loops of thinking. I've definitely, I've had some treatment for, mental health issues, and I definitely myself have had that experience of kind of getting stuck in this, like, I keep thinking about it over and over. I'm, in depression, we call that rumination. This is sort of just mulling the thought over and over and over in our minds. And if you think about things like depression, major depression, typically when we do that, we're doing that alone, right? In our own headspace, right? Because if we talk to our loved ones or someone who cares about us, what are they going to say? They're going to say, well, what are you talking about? You're not a terrible person, or you're not a loser, or you're not ugly, whatever those self-deprecating thoughts are, we get talked out of them. But when we're kind of stuck in our own mind, that's when that sort of repetitive thinking comes in. And I do, I think during QAnon, especially, we kind of heard that as at least an anecdotal narrative, this idea that, generally speaking, people didn't find out about QAnon by talking to their loved ones. I mean, of course, that happened on occasion. But, I think there's a kind of compelling narrative that during the pandemic, where we were no longer engaging in the same kind of social situation. A lot of people started working from home. They started working remotely so that they were in front of their computers, for 10 plus hours per day. That's kind of that same sort of isolated, uh, sort of narrowed social scope where you can kind of fall down the proverbial rabbit hole and get stuck in those repetitive loops. So I think there's a parallel there that I'm hearing in terms of what you're saying.
For some people who have depression, anxiety, or other mental health problems, sometimes they can gravitate to conspiracy theories because they might provide some kind of answers or certainty. Is that a fair enough statement?
For sure. There's definitely research that shows that certain psychological needs for closure, certainty, and control, I sometimes refer to that as the 3 Cs, that those sort of psychological drives are one of the risk factors that make people more likely to embrace conspiratorial narratives, because they do provide a sort of tidy package of why random events, some of which are very upsetting, like the assassination of a president or the death of Princess Diana. And I might tell you, well, sorry, sometimes things happen randomly and for no clear reason, and that itself can be very distressing. So the idea behind needs for certainty and closure is, well, okay, it's this very distressing narrative because it's a conspiracy, but at least it's a narrative and it suggests that there's an evil actor and therefore something that can be done about it, versus like, sorry, planes just crash sometimes, and it wasn't a plot to blow up the airplane.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing people sometimes misunderstand about QAnon, in that, you read some stuff and it's really scary. It's a very scary world with all cabal and everything going on. However, there is a character there who knows what's happening and has a plan. And so even though there's all these evil forces, if you really believe in it, it's kind of comforting because, well, look, at least Q has got it. And I think people don't always appreciate that when it can be a great feeling. It can be a great feeling to have that certainty, and then on top of it, a community, and people telling you you're right, and other people don't understand you. It can be a really good feeling.
Yeah, 100%. What I often say about QAnon is that for sure it's a conspiracy theory, but you can think about QAnon in a number of different ways. There are some people who have likened it to a religious movement. There are some people, of course, who have likened it to a cult. There are some people who have picked up on the sort of interactional component and say it's like an alternative role-playing game. And I think all of those perspectives are helpful to understand really what a QAnon believer gets from sort of jumping onto that belief system and being involved in that community. Another psychological need that's been found to predispose or to be make one more likely to believe in conspiracy theories is need for uniqueness. So one of the things that seems to drive conspiracy theory belief for some people is this idea that I've stumbled on the narrative, and all the rest of you people who are sheep just following the mainstream narrative, you're wearing blinders, but like I've seen the truth. And in the setting of QAnon, not only is Q the person with the answers, but I'm also unscrambling the messages and deciphering and picking up the breadcrumbs. And, I'm a baker. These are all these QAnon terms. So not only am I unique because I've stumbled in that onto that piece of information, but I'm also sort of engaging with Q. We're working together. I'm a collaborator. I'm bringing the truth to the world. And I think that point is often lost because we can, if the belief is playing those roles for the individual, we can't just expect them to I'm going to tell them a different thing and they're going to walk away from that, because we're not going to replace those psychological needs. How do you replace that sense of uniqueness?
Just to hammer home that point of it's normal, right? We all believe something, and it's natural to believe crazy shit.
It is. And when I talk about this these three components, right? The mistrust and the misinformation and the motivated reasoning. I think those components are tied to these phrases that we hear all the time when we talk about conspiracy theory belief. The first phrase is just asking questions, right? The second one is I'm looking for answers. And the third is I'm doing my research. And I think those three phrases sort of speak to a drive that many of us have, where we want answers. We want to understand the world around us. We want to understand why things happen. Um, and so I think that those sort of psychological needs drive us to look for stories and narratives. And we've always been interested in stories or mythologies or fantasies. And indeed, I think life would be very boring without those. Uh, so I think, I think it's important to acknowledge that component. And misinformation scientists have, I think, sort of famously found that so-called fake news online, at least, travels farther and faster than the boring old truth. And so that's part of the conspiracy theory appeal. Even for someone like me, who's an academic, who's interested in conspiracy theories, I might not believe in them, but I still think it's fascinating to learn about them and to talk to people who do believe in them and to try to figure out, why they believe that. So there is just something very appealing about those narratives. And unfortunately, the truth is oftentimes very boring and just like not very invigorating. And so I often say sometimes if we're hoping to win the war on misinformation, we have to make truth sexier, right? We have to find ways for truth to be appealing to people. We have to be better storytellers as part of it.
How do you see this all panning out? Are we on the way to a bad place?
It's an excellent question. It's $1 million question. I sort of struggled to answer it because I think I started writing that book in 2021, sort of just after the pandemic had started. And I really did want to focus on the universality of false belief and to destigmatize it. And although certainly my book gets into politics, there's an entire chapter on politics, I was not trying to be overtly political. Unfortunately, false beliefs and conspiracy theories, I think, have become increasingly political, so that it's no longer really possible to talk about this subject without getting into politics and a certain asymmetry that there is on the left and the right, at least here in the U.S., about conspiratorial narratives. And because of that, and because of recent political events here in the U.S., I can't say that I'm very optimistic, because what we've seen since I started writing the book is actually things go in I think, a very concerning and dangerous direction. I think there's a solution. I think there's ways that we can dig ourselves out. But now I think it will be harder to do so. And mostly the writing on the wall that I see is really headed in an opposite direction.
On that uplifting note, thank you so much for your time. It would be great to hopefully chat again and maybe meet you in person sometime.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.